The market district of Helios 7 trading station never slept. Thousands of aliens moved through the corridors every day, buying supplies, selling goods, and traveling to distant worlds. Among all these busy creatures, nobody paid attention to the small dragon limping through the crowds. His scales had lost their color long ago. Once they might have been red or gold, but now they looked like old rust. He was barely larger than a cat, with wings so thin you could see through them. Around his neck hung a metal collar, dull and scratched from years of wear. The dragon moved slowly past a fruit stand. The vendor, a tall alien with 4 arms, made a sharp hissing sound and waved him away. "Get lost, pest," the vendor said in Galactic Common. "You smell bad and scare my customers." At the next stall, a different alien threw an empty container at him. It missed, but the message was clear. The dragon kept walking. He had learned not to expect anything different. This happened everywhere he went. The medical clinic staff locked their doors when they saw him coming. Shop owners turned on loud sonic devices that hurt his ears. Even the station's security guards would kick in his direction if he got too close. The dragon was simply looking for food and warmth. His body ached all the time now. His eyes didn't work as well as they used to. Every step felt heavy, like his bones were made of stone instead of hollow dragon bones. He found a warm spot near a ventilation grate and lay down. The heat felt good on his cold body. Maybe he would rest here for a while. Maybe forever. He was so tired of walking and being chased away. A young alien child stopped and pointed at him. "Mommy, what's that?" the child asked. The mother pulled the child away quickly. "Just an old animal, sweetie. Don't touch it. It might have diseases." The dragon closed his eyes. He didn't blame them. He knew what he looked like now. A pathetic creature, useless and unwanted. Nothing like what he used to be. Hours passed. The crowds changed from day shoppers to evening travelers. The dragon stayed by his warm grate, drifting in and out of sleep. In his dreams, he remembered flying between stars, his wings spreading across entire skies. He remembered when others looked at him with respect instead of disgust. When he woke, something had changed. New sounds came from a nearby shop. Someone was moving furniture around and talking to themselves in a language the dragon didn't recognize immediately. Human. That was the word. Humans were new to this part of space. The dragon lifted his head slightly. Through a large window, he could see a human male arranging chairs and mirrors inside a small shop. The sign above the door had symbols the dragon's old eyes couldn't quite read. His body was cold again. The ventilation grate had stopped blowing warm air. The dragon gathered what little strength he had and dragged himself toward the new shop. Maybe the floor near the door would be warm. New businesses sometimes had heating problems that made the floors hot. He pressed himself against the door, feeling for any warmth. Nothing yet, but the door itself blocked some of the cold corridor wind. Inside the shop, the human noticed him almost immediately. The dragon waited for what always came next. Yelling, thrown objects, maybe just the door opening and a foot pushing him away. Instead, the door opened and the human crouched down. His face showed concern, not anger. "Well, aren't you a sorry sight?" the human said softly. The dragon looked up at him, confused. The human's tone was gentle, kind even. "Come on in, little guy," the human said, gesturing inside. "You look like you could use a warm spot." This had to be a trick. Kindness was always a trick, but the dragon was so cold and warmth was coming from inside the shop. He was too tired to care if it was a trap. He limped across the threshold. The shop was small but warm. The human closed the door behind him and went to adjust a heating control. "There we go," the human said. "That should help." The dragon found a spot on the floor where heat came up through a vent. He collapsed onto it with a sound that was half relief, half pain. The human moved around the shop, organizing his tools and supplies. Every few minutes, he would glance at the dragon with that same concerned expression. Finally, he came closer and knelt down. "Let me get you some water," the human said. He filled a small bowl and placed it near the dragon's head. The dragon was too tired to drink, but the gesture was strange and unexpected. Then the human noticed the collar. He leaned closer, adjusting something on his face. Glasses, the dragon remembered they were called. Humans had weak eyes. The human studied the symbols on the collar carefully. His expression changed from curious to confused to shocked. He stood up quickly, his face going pale. "Oh my God," the human whispered, looking down at the dragon. "What have they done to you?" The dragon didn't understand. Why was the human looking at him like that? like he was seeing something important instead of just an old dying animal. The human grabbed a small device from his pocket and started touching its screen rapidly, reading something. He kept looking between the screen and the collar, his hands beginning to shake. "You're—" The human started, then stopped. He sat down heavily in one of his shop chairs. "You're one of them. One of the dragon commanders. Aren't you?" The dragon's eye focused on the human with difficulty. This man could read the old language. After all these years, someone could actually read it. The human stood again and came back to the dragon. He knelt down carefully, respectfully. "I'm Eddie," he said. "I don't know how you ended up here, but this isn't right. This isn't how your story should end." The dragon wanted to tell him that stories didn't always end the way they should, that sometimes heroes became forgotten things that everyone ignored, but he was too tired to speak. Eddie seemed to understand anyway. "Are you hungry?" he asked. Before the dragon could respond, someone knocked on the shop door. A customer. Eddie looked torn between his first customer and the dragon on his floor. "Stay here," Eddie told the dragon gently. "Please, we'll figure this out." The dragon laid his head down on the warm vent and closed his eyes. For the first time in longer than he could remember, someone had looked at him and seen what he truly was. It didn't change anything, probably. He was still dying, still forgotten by everyone else. But this one human had seen him, that was something. Eddie's hands wouldn't stop shaking as he cut the Vrelian customer's hair. His mind kept going back to the small dragon sleeping on his floor and the words carved into that ancient collar. The inscription was in pre-collapse Draconic. Eddie had learned to read it during long, boring trips through space, when he had nothing to do but study dead languages. Most people thought those languages were useless. Right now, Eddie was grateful he'd been bored enough to learn. The words on the collar said this dragon was Ashtaroth the Eternal, Lord Commander of the 7th Fleet, Keeper of the Stargates, the one who burned the Void Tyrants and saved 1,000 worlds. Eddie had heard stories about the dragon commanders since joining the merchant fleet. Everyone in space knew the legends. Giant dragons that could fly between stars without ships, creatures that breathed fire hot enough to melt metal, beings that lived for thousands of years and ruled the galaxy with wisdom and strength. But those were just stories, legends, things parents told children before bed. They weren't real, except one was sleeping on his floor right now. The Vrelian customer left happy with his haircut. Eddie locked the door immediately and flipped his shop sign to closed. He needed to think. He pulled out his datapad and started searching for information. The Galactic archives had very little about dragon commanders. Most entries called them mythology, fictional creatures from ancient times. Some scholars argued they might have been real once, but the evidence was unclear. Eddie switched to the human databases. Earth had only joined the galactic community 5 years ago. But human diplomats had downloaded every piece of information they could access. Humans were thorough like that. There, a file on ancient draconic history. Eddie read quickly. Dragon commanders had been real. They ruled during something called the Draconic Empire thousands of years ago. They fought wars against terrible enemies. They kept peace across hundreds of star systems. Then civilization collapsed and everything changed. When the galaxy rebuilt itself, the dragon commanders were gone. Most people assumed they died during the collapse. The few who believed they survived thought they'd left this part of space completely. Eddie looked at the small dragon again. According to the file, dragons got smaller as they aged. Their power burned down slowly over thousands of years. At the very end of their lives, they would be tiny, weak versions of what they once were. This dragon fit that description perfectly. Eddie grabbed his datapad and made a call. His friend Rachel was a xenobiologist working in the station's medical section. If anyone could help him understand what he was dealing with, it was her. "Rachel, I need you to come to my shop right now." "Eddie, I have patients waiting. It's important, really important. Please, just trust me." 20 minutes later, Rachel walked into the shop. She looked annoyed until she saw the dragon. "Oh, that poor thing has been wandering the station for weeks. Animal control keeps debating what to do with him." "Look at his collar," Eddie said, handing her a magnification lens. Rachel took the lens and examined the collar carefully. Her annoyed expression faded. She looked confused, then shocked, then disbelieving. "These symbols. Eddie, do you know what this says?" "I translated it already," Eddie said. He showed her his notes. Rachel read them twice. Then she looked at the dragon again, her scientific mind working through possibilities. "This can't be real. Dragon commanders are myths. Myths based on something real, Eddie argued. And someone has to be the last one. Rachel pulled out her portable medical scanner without another word. She ran it over the dragon's small form. The device beeped and displayed information. Rachel's eyes went wide. His cellular structure is completely unique, she said quietly. I've never seen anything like it. The regenerative markers in his cells shouldn't be possible. His genetic code is incredibly complex. And his age? She looked up at Eddie. My scanner can't determine how old he is. It just says the reading is beyond its calibration range. Eddie felt his heart pounding. So it could be true? If this is really one of the dragon commanders, we're looking at the most important historical discovery in 3,000 years. Rachel sat back on her heels. But Eddie, you're asking me to believe in something everyone thinks is a fairy tale. Look at the evidence, Eddie said. The collar, the cellular structure, his age, the way he looks exactly like the descriptions of aged dragons. What else could he be? Rachel stared at the dragon for a long time. She saw how hard he was breathing, how thin he was, how his body seemed to be giving up. He's dying, isn't he? I think so, Eddie said quietly. We need to tell someone. The council. The historical society. This is too important to keep quiet. I already tried, Eddie admitted. I spent an hour making calls before you got here. Nobody would listen. One counselor laughed at me. Another said humans were too new to understand the difference between legend and reality. Someone else accused me of running a scam to get attention for my new shop. Rachel's jaw tightened. She'd faced similar treatment. Many older species in the galactic community treated humans like ignorant children. Then we need to build a case they can't ignore. Document everything. Get evidence they can't dismiss. They spent the next few hours working together. Rachel ran every test her equipment could perform. Eddie took photographs from every angle. He compiled linguistic analyses and cross-referenced historical databases. They built a file of evidence that should have been impossible to ignore. Then they started making calls again. The Galactic Historical Society refused to review their data. They said they didn't have time for hoaxes. The Station Council said this wasn't their responsibility. The Dragon Cultural Preservation Committee told them to stop wasting everyone's time with obvious fakes. Nobody would listen. Nobody would even look at their evidence. They won't take us seriously, Rachel said, frustration clear in her voice. We have proof and they won't even consider it. Eddie sat in his barber chair, feeling defeated. Around them, the small dragon slept on the heating vent. He looked so peaceful, so tired. Like he'd given up on expecting anything from the universe. Then what do we do? Eddie asked. Just watch him die here alone? The dragon's eye opened slightly, just enough to look at Eddie. In that ancient gaze, Eddie saw acceptance. This wasn't new to the creature. This was normal. Being ignored. Being dismissed. Being left to fade away while everyone walked past. Something inside Eddie hardened. No, we're not giving up. He pulled up a different interface on his datapad. Not official channels, not government databases, something else entirely. The human news networks, public forums. Social media, what are you doing? Rachel asked. If the authorities won't listen, maybe regular people will, Eddie said. He started writing a post. Humans are new here. We don't have thousands of years of dismissing these stories as myths. We believe in underdogs. And this, he gestured at the dragon, this is the ultimate underdog story. He wrote carefully. He included photos of the collar with his translation, Rachel's medical scans, the historical research. He explained what the dragon commanders meant to galactic history, how they'd saved countless lives, how one of them had ended up forgotten and dying on a backwater trading station. This might make things worse, Rachel warned. The council hates public attention on internal matters. Good, Eddie said. Let them be uncomfortable. Maybe then they'll actually pay attention. He posted the story to every human forum and news site he could find. Then he put his datapad down and looked at the sleeping dragon. I don't know if this will help, Eddie said softly, but you deserve better than this. You deserve to be remembered. The dragon's eye closed again, but Eddie could have sworn he saw something that looked like gratitude in that brief glance. Neither of them expected what would happen next. 6 hours after Eddie posted his story, his datapad started beeping nonstop. Messages flooded in from everywhere. His post had spread through human networks like fire through dry grass. People were sharing it, commenting on it, expressing anger at how the dragon had been treated. Eddie watched the numbers climb. Hundreds of shares became thousands, then tens of thousands. Humans across the galaxy were reading about the forgotten dragon commander. But the story didn't stop with humans. A poet from the Borsarian species saw Eddie's post and wrote a beautiful verse about honoring forgotten heroes. She shared it with all her followers. A student at the Galactic University confirmed Eddie's translation of the collar and shared that confirmation with her professors and classmates. Within one day, the story had jumped to mainstream galactic news. Within 2 days, it was everywhere. Rachel burst into Eddie's shop on the third morning, her face flushed with excitement. "Eddie, turn on your screen. You need to see this." Eddie activated his wall display. A major news channel was showing. A Tellarian news anchor was talking about the story, his translated voice filling the small shop. This raises difficult questions about how we treat our own history. The dragon commanders were not myths. They were real beings who gave everything for the civilization we now enjoy. If even one survived into our time, don't we owe him better than neglect? The broadcast cut to various experts. Historians debated the evidence. Scientists discussed what it meant. Cultural commentators talked about collective memory and gratitude. Not everyone believed the story was true, but people were paying attention now. They were talking about it, thinking about it. Eddie's shop door chimed constantly over the next few days. Aliens from dozens of species came by. Some wanted to see the dragon for themselves. Others came to offer help or donations. Many came simply to apologize. A Chlorian fruit vendor who had chased the dragon away from his stall arrived with tears streaming from his 4 eyes. "I am so ashamed," he said in broken galactic common. "I did not know. Please forgive me." The Talgoran dock worker who had kicked at the dragon came late one night. He didn't knock. He just left a pile of credits on the counter and walked away quickly, too ashamed to face Eddie. Through all of this, the dragon slept. Rachel had set up medical equipment in the corner of Eddie's shop. She monitored his vital signs constantly. The readings weren't good. "He's getting worse," Rachel told Eddie on the third evening. "Moving him to a proper medical facility might kill him at this point. But staying here?" She didn't finish the sentence. They both knew what she meant. That night, something unexpected happened. An official shuttle from the Galactic Council arrived at the station. 3 counselors stepped off. High-ranking officials who normally never left the council chambers. They walked through the station toward Eddie's small barber shop. The lead counselor was an elderly Vrelian woman named Ishtar. Her family had served on the council for many generations. She entered Eddie's shop, with 2 other counselors following behind her. Her expression was stern and formal. "This is highly irregular," Ishtar began, spreading unverified claims across public networks about... She stopped. Her eyes had found the dragon on the floor. She stared at him, then at the collar around his neck. For a long moment, nobody spoke. "May I examine the collar?" Ishtar asked, her formal tone gone. Eddie nodded. Ishtar approached slowly, like she was approaching something sacred. She knelt down beside the dragon. Her hands trembled as she adjusted her translation device and read the ancient inscription. When she finished reading, she stayed kneeling, her head bowed low. "My great-great-grandmother told me stories," Ishtar said quietly. Her grandmother told them to her. Stories passed down through our family for generations, about the dragon commander who saved our homeworld from the void tyrants, how he held a breach in space open for 3 days while our people evacuated, how his flames were so bright they could be seen from orbit. She looked up at Eddie with tears on her face. "We named our largest city after him, Ashtaroth. We always said the name came from legend, but my great-great-grandmother insisted it was real, that he was real, that we should never forget what he did for us." Ishtar's voice broke. "And we let him starve in our corridors. We let him freeze on our streets. We treated him like garbage." "You didn't know," Eddie said, though the words felt empty. "We didn't care to know," Ishtar corrected him. "We saw an old creature suffering and we looked away. It doesn't matter if he was a dragon commander or a common animal. That speaks terribly of who we've become." She stood up and turned to her fellow counselors. "Get our best medical team here immediately. I want specialists from every relevant field. And contact the historical archives. We need to know how this happened. How did we lose track of him? How did we forget?" The dragon's eye opened. He looked at Ishtar. Something passed between them. Recognition, maybe. Or just acknowledgement. "Can you speak?" Ishtar asked gently, kneeling again. Can you tell us what happened to you? The dragon's mouth opened. The sound that came out was rough and broken, like wind through shattered stone. He hadn't spoken in so long that his voice barely worked. Tired, he whispered. The word was so quiet Eddie almost didn't hear it. So tired. Rachel stepped forward with a medical injector. I can give him something for the pain. It might help him speak more clearly. But Counselor Ishtar, he's extremely weak. I don't know if he can survive much longer even with the best medical care. Do what you can, Ishtar said, and someone contact the archives immediately. If he's willing to share his memories, we need to record them. 3,000 years of lost history might rest in his mind. Rachel administered the medication carefully. Within minutes, the dragon's breathing became easier. His eyes cleared slightly. The small creature looked at Eddie, and for the first time since they'd met, there seemed to be hope in that ancient gaze. Thank you, the dragon whispered. His voice was clearer now, though still weak. Thank you for seeing me. Eddie felt his throat tighten. Everyone should have seen you. Everyone should have cared. But you did, the dragon replied. That matters. The shop filled with people over the next hour. Medical specialists arrived with equipment. Historians came with recording devices. Council officials coordinated everything. Curious onlookers gathered outside, though security kept them from entering. Eddie stood back and watched it all happen. The forgotten dragon commander was forgotten no longer. People finally cared, finally recognized him for what he was. But as Eddie looked at the small dragon surrounded by all this attention, he couldn't shake a terrible feeling. They'd found him too late. All this recognition, all this care, it had come too late. The dragon met his eyes across the crowded room. In that moment, Eddie understood. The dragon knew it too. He'd been dying for a long time. This wasn't going to save him. But at least he wouldn't die alone and forgotten. At least someone had cared enough to read an old collar and see the truth. That would have to be enough. Eddie's small barber shop looked nothing like a barber shop anymore. Medical equipment filled every corner. Scanners hummed and beeped. Holographic displays showed complicated biological data that Eddie couldn't understand. Specialists from 4 different species talked in quiet voices, checking readings and adjusting treatments. In the middle of it all, the dragon they now knew as Ashtaroth lay on a specially made cushion. The medications flowing through his small body had helped. His breathing was steadier. His eyes were clearer. But Rachel had pulled Eddie aside earlier with bad news. The drugs are just buying time, she'd said. His body is shutting down. This isn't disease or injury. It's old age. Dragons don't die quickly. They fade over years, sometimes centuries. He's been fading for a very long time. Can't anything be done? Eddie had asked. Rachel shook her head. We're not fighting sickness. We're fighting time itself. His cells are simply stopping, one by one. There's no cure for that. Now Eddie stood near the wall, watching as historians set up their recording equipment. The lead historian was a Mendali named Torin. He moved with careful reverence, treating this moment like the sacred event it was. Lord Commander, Torin said, using the ancient title with obvious emotion. If you're willing and able, we would like to hear your story. The true history has been lost. We have fragments and legends and contradictions. You are the only primary source left from that time. Ashtaroth's eye moved slowly to focus on the historian. The medications had given him strength, but everything still seemed to take great effort. What do you want to know? Everything, Torin said simply. But we understand you're tired. Perhaps we could start with something simple? How did you come to be here on this station? The dragon was quiet for so long Eddie thought he'd fallen asleep. Then slowly he began to speak. His voice was still weak, but the words came easier now. I was there when the first multi-species council met, Ashtaroth said, after the war ended. After we defeated the Void Tyrants. We dragon commanders had kept order for thousands of years, but we knew our time was ending. The galaxy was changing. Dozens of species were reaching for the stars. They needed to govern themselves. They didn't need ancient dragons ruling over them like children. His voice became distant, lost in memory. Most of my brothers and sisters chose ceremonial death. They transferred their knowledge to libraries and databases, then faded peacefully. It was considered honorable, but I wanted to see something different. I wanted to watch the new age unfold, the civilization we'd fought to preserve, so I took a different path. What path? Torin asked gently. I used the old magics to reduce my size, to blend in. I thought I could walk among the people unnoticed. Watch the galaxy grow. When my time truly came, I would fade quietly without disturbing the new order. How long ago was this? Torin's recording devices captured every word. 3,217 standard years ago, Ashtaroth said without hesitation. I have been counting everyone. The historians in the room exchanged glances. 3,000 years of living history, walking among them, unnoticed. At first everything was wonderful, Ashtaroth continued. I watched species learning to cooperate. I saw art flourish, science advance. The council grew from a handful of worlds to hundreds, then thousands. I watched empires rise peacefully and disputes settled with words instead of weapons. Everything we'd hoped for was happening. His voice grew sadder, but I also watched memory fade. Within a few centuries, the dragon commanders became stories. Within 1,000 years, we became myths. By 2,000 years, most beings didn't believe we'd ever existed. Our sacrifices became fairy tales told to children. Why didn't you reveal yourself? Counselor Ishtar asked. She had remained in the shop, refusing to leave. You could have shown them the truth. I tried, Ashtaroth said. A few times early on, but each time I was dismissed as a fraud. A small dragon claiming to be a great commander? Impossible. They said I was mad or lying. And when I proved what I was, when I showed my power. He paused, pain crossing his small features. It frightened them. They didn't want the old powers returning. They wanted their independence, their self-rule, and they were right to want it. So I stopped trying. I accepted that I was a ghost haunting a civilization that had moved beyond needing me. As you grew smaller and weaker, Eddie said softly, I forgot how much loneliness would hurt. Ashtaroth admitted, I forgot that even ghosts need to be seen sometimes. These last few centuries have been very difficult. As my power faded, as my body diminished, I became invisible in a new way. Not a myth, just a nuisance, an old animal in everyone's way. He looked directly at Eddie. Until you, a human, a species so new to the stars you still remember your own isolation. You looked at a collar written in a dead language and you cared enough to read it. The room had gone completely silent. Even the medical equipment seemed muted. Everyone present understood they were witnessing something extraordinary. A direct link to the ancient past, speaking about thousands of years of hidden history. I'm sorry, Ishtar said, her voice breaking. On behalf of everyone, on behalf of all of us, I'm so sorry. You deserved better. You deserve to be remembered. I am being remembered now, Ashtaroth replied. In these final days. That is enough. Final days? Torin interrupted. Lord Commander, with proper medical care, perhaps we could— No, the dragon said firmly. I am 10,392 years old. I have lived long enough. I have seen what I wanted to see. I watched the galaxy become something beautiful, and now at the end I've been reminded that kindness still exists, that even in a civilization that forgot its heroes, there are still beings who care about strangers. He closed his eye. For a moment everyone thought he'd gone to sleep. Then he spoke again, softer. I would like to tell you the true stories, before I go. Not as a dragon commander. Those days are past. But as someone who was there, someone who remembers. Would you listen? Yes, Torin said immediately. Around the room, dozens of heads nodded. We will listen, and we will make sure others remember. For the next 3 days, Ashtaroth spoke. He told them about the Void Tyrant War, about battles fought in the darkness between stars. He described the other dragon commanders, their names and personalities and sacrifices. He shared memories of species now extinct, of the early days of cooperation between worlds, of mistakes made and lessons learned. The historians recorded everything. The story spread across the galaxy. Billions of beings watched live streams of the ancient dragon commander, sharing the true history of their civilization. Schools stopped classes to listen. The council declared it a historic event. Eddie kept his shop closed through it all. He sat beside the small dragon, making sure he stayed comfortable and warm. Rachel monitored the vital signs that were slowly, steadily declining. On the 4th day, Ashtaroth's voice began to fail. The medications could only do so much. I'm tired now, he said. Truly tired. Is there more you need? No, Lord Commander, Torin said gently. You've given us more than we ever hoped for. Generations will learn from your words. The dragon's eye opened one last time. It found Eddie. Thank you. For the warmth. For the kindness. For reading an old collar when no one else cared. Thank you. Eddie replied, his voice thick with emotion. For everything you did. For the galaxy you saved. For the peace you built. We should have thanked you long ago. Ashtaroth made a sound that might have been a laugh. You're doing it now. That's enough. He closed his eye and didn't open it again. The council chamber had never held so many beings at once. Representatives from thousands of worlds filled every available space. More watched through video feeds from across the galaxy. This was the largest gathering the Galactic Council had organized in 300 years. Eddie stood on the speaker's platform, feeling completely out of place. He was just a barber from Montana. He didn't belong in rooms like this, surrounded by powerful leaders and important officials. But Counselor Ishtar had insisted he be here. You gave him dignity when no one else would, she'd said. You need to be part of this. In the center of the chamber, raised on a platform of polished stone, lay Ashtaroth. But he no longer looked like the small, tired dragon Eddie had found at his door. Rachel had explained what would happen. Dragon commanders had one final transformation. In death, they returned briefly to their true size before their bodies converted to pure energy. Ashtaroth was magnificent now. 40 meters from nose to tail, scales gleaming brilliant crimson, the color restored by death, wings folded gracefully against his massive body. This was how he'd looked in his prime when he defended worlds and forged peace across the stars. Eddie couldn't stop staring. This was what everyone had refused to see. This was the true form of the creature they'd kicked aside and ignored. Counselor Ishtar stepped to the main podium. Her voice carried across the vast chamber, amplified by technology but strong on its own. We failed him. Let us be completely clear about that. For centuries, one of our greatest heroes walked among us, and we were too blind, too dismissive, too absorbed in our own concerns to see him. She paused, letting her words sink in. The chamber was absolutely silent. His death can be a turning point if we choose to make it one. We can honor his memory not just with monuments and ceremonies, but with action, by remembering that every being we encounter has a story, has value we might not immediately see. Other speakers followed. Historians shared discoveries from Ashtaroth's accounts. His stories had already rewritten textbooks and solved mysteries scholars had debated for centuries. Scientists discussed what they'd learned from studying his unique biology. Artists talked about works they'd created inspired by his sacrifice. Then Torin, the Mendali historian, spoke about the knowledge that had been preserved. Lord Commander Ashtaroth gave us 3 days of testimony. In that time, he resolved dozens of historical debates. He corrected our understanding of major events. He gave us names and details we thought were lost forever. But more than facts, he gave us perspective. He reminded us that history is made by real beings with real emotions and real sacrifices, not legends, not myths. Real people who gave everything so we could be here today. Finally, it was Eddie's turn. He walked to the podium on shaking legs. Thousands of faces looked at him. Millions more watched through screens across the galaxy. I'm not a politician, Eddie began. I'm not a scholar or a leader. I'm a barber from Earth who got lucky with an old language. But I think that's the whole point. Ashtaroth didn't need someone important to help him. He needed someone who cared enough to see him, to look at a suffering creature and think, I should do something about this. Eddie glanced at the magnificent dragon form. He told me something in those last days. He said he'd been trying to stay invisible, that he thought the galaxy had moved beyond needing dragon commanders. But these last weeks have shown us we'll always need heroes, not to rule us or fight our battles, but to remind us what we should try to be. Brave, selfless, kind. He stepped back from the podium. His part was done. The ceremony continued with traditional rites that Eddie didn't fully understand. Prayers in ancient languages, songs from cultures across the galaxy. Each species represented added something to honor the dragon commander who had protected them all. Then, as the final hymn ended, Ashtaroth's body began to glow. The transformation had begun. Dragons didn't leave corpses behind. They returned their energy to the universe itself. The light grew brighter and brighter until Eddie had to shield his eyes. When it faded, Ashtaroth was gone. Only a faint shimmer in the air remained, like heat waves on a summer day. Then even that disappeared. The chamber stayed silent for a long moment. Then slowly beings began to leave. Some were crying. Others looked thoughtful. Many seemed changed by what they'd witnessed. Rachel found Eddie outside the chamber. You did good, she said quietly. I didn't do enough, Eddie replied. I found him too late. You found him, Rachel said firmly. When thousands walked past him every day, you saw him. You cared. That matters more than you know. In the weeks that followed, change spread across the galaxy like ripples in water. The Council established the Ashtaroth Foundation, dedicated to preserving history and making sure important knowledge wasn't lost. New laws required all public facilities to provide help to beings in distress, regardless of their species or appearance. Eddie's barbershop became famous. Beings from across the sector came to see where the last Dragon Commander spent his final days. They came to thank the human who had recognized him. Eddie was offered honors, awards, positions with important organizations. He turned them all down. Why? Rachel asked one morning over coffee. The council wants to give you a medal. Universities want to hire you as a professor. You could do anything now. I'm a barber, Eddie said simply. A good one, I think. That's enough for me. But I could do a lot of things, Eddie interrupted gently. But I like cutting hair. I like talking to customers. I like this simple life. The important thing wasn't finding Ashtaroth because I wanted to be famous. It was helping him because he needed help. That's all, Rachel smiled. You're a strange human, Eddie. Maybe, he agreed. Eddie kept his shop exactly as it was. He left the heating vent where Ashtaroth had slept unchanged. Sometimes, when the shop was quiet and empty, he would look at that spot and remember, a small dragon cold and tired and forgotten, a being who had saved the galaxy and ended up alone. He wondered sometimes if he'd done the right thing, if drawing attention to Ashtaroth had helped or just made his final days more chaotic. But then he remembered the dragon's last words, "Thank you for seeing me." Maybe that was all anyone wanted at the end. To be seen, to be recognized, to matter. The shop's door chimed, pulling Eddie from his thoughts. A customer entered, a Chlorian merchant with her young child. The little one's eyes went wide as she looked around the famous shop. Is it true? The child asked in a whisper. Did a dragon commander really stay here? He did, Eddie confirmed with a gentle smile. At the very end of his life. My teacher said he saved the whole galaxy, the child continued, clearly in awe. That he fought terrible monsters and protected everyone. That's true, Eddie said. He was very brave and very kind. And he wanted everyone to know that the galaxy he helped build was worth saving. The child nodded seriously, memorizing this moment. Eddie wondered how many other children across how many worlds were learning the real story now. How many would grow up knowing dragon commanders not as myths, but as real heroes who made real sacrifices? That evening, Eddie stood outside his shop, looking at the stars visible through the station's windows. Somewhere out there, Ashtaroth's energy had joined the universe. The final journey of the last dragon commander. I hope you're at peace, Eddie said softly to the stars. I hope you saw that the galaxy you protected was worth everything you gave. That people can still be kind, still care, still see value in strangers. The stars seemed to shimmer slightly, but that might have been his imagination. Eddie went back inside, locked the door, and turned off the lights. Tomorrow he would cut hair and sweep floors. He would live his simple, quiet life. And he would remember. 5 months had passed since Ashtaroth's death. Eddie's life had mostly returned to normal, though normal meant something different now. His shop was busier than ever. People came from all over the station for haircuts, but also to see the place where history had happened. Eddie didn't mind. He liked the steady work and the conversations. Today was different, though. Today marked the official opening of the Ashtaroth Memorial Library on the station's upper levels. Eddie had been invited to the ceremony. He'd tried to decline, but Counselor Ishtar had insisted. You're part of this story, she'd said. You need to be there. So Eddie closed his shop early and made his way to the upper levels. The memorial library occupied what had once been unused storage space. The council had transformed it into something beautiful. Tall windows let in starlight. Shelves held thousands of historical texts. Interactive displays showed Ashtaroth's testimony, available for anyone to study. But the centerpiece was a statue in the main hall. Ashtaroth in his true form, wings spread wide, carved from a single piece of dark stone that seemed to shimmer with inner light. At the base, an inscription in multiple languages told his story. Who he was, what he'd done, how he'd died forgotten until one human bothered to look closely. Eddie stood before the statue, feeling emotions he couldn't quite name. Pride maybe, sadness definitely. And something else. A sense of connection to something bigger than himself. Impressive, isn't it? Ishtar's voice came from behind him. Eddie turned. The elderly counselor looked tired but satisfied. It's beautiful, Eddie said honestly. We tried to capture how he truly was, Ishtar said, looking up at the statue. Not the small, tired creature most saw, but what he really was underneath. What we all failed to recognize, she turned to Eddie. I wanted to thank you personally. Before the ceremony starts and everything becomes official, you gave us all a gift. You reminded us that heroes are real, that history matters, that every being deserves dignity and recognition. I just helped one old dragon, Eddie said uncomfortably. Anyone would have done the same. But they didn't, Ishtar said firmly. Thousands of beings saw him every day. I saw him. I walked past him multiple times and never looked closely. Never asked questions. You were the one who cared enough to see beyond the surface. The ceremony began shortly after. Hundreds of beings filled the library's main hall. Speeches were given. The library was officially dedicated. Children from a local school sang a song they'd written about remembering heroes. It was moving and meaningful, and Eddie felt oddly disconnected from it all. This wasn't why he'd helped Ashtaroth. He hadn't done it for recognition or ceremonies. He'd done it because an old creature was cold and hungry, and that seemed wrong. After the ceremony ended, Eddie tried to slip away quietly. But a voice stopped him. Excuse me? Are you Eddie? Eddie turned. A young Orvathi female stood there, all four eyes looking at him hopefully. Yes, that's me. I'm studying xenobiology at the university, she said quickly. I read your story about Ashtaroth. It changed everything for me. I was going to drop out. I thought studying ancient species was pointless because everyone said they were just myths. But you proved the myths were real. You showed that history matters. So I stayed in school. I'm going to be a xenobiologist now, and it's because of you. Eddie didn't know what to say. I'm glad I could help, he managed finally. The student smiled and walked away. Eddie stood there processing what she'd said. His simple act of kindness had changed someone's entire life path. How many others had been affected in ways he didn't know about? Eddie returned to his shop later that evening. The station's corridors were quiet now. Most beings had gone to their homes or quarters for the night cycle. Eddie unlocked his door and stepped inside. Everything was exactly as he'd left it. The heating vent where Ashtaroth had slept still hummed quietly. The spot where medical equipment had filled the corners was clear now, just empty space. But Eddie could still remember how it had been. The small dragon curled up, tired and forgotten. Then, surrounded by people who finally cared, Eddie sat in his barber chair and looked around his small shop. This was where everything had changed. Not just for Ashtaroth, but for the whole galaxy in a small way. People were more careful now, more willing to look closely at beings they might have dismissed before. The council had established programs to help lost or abandoned creatures. Schools taught about the dragon commanders as real history, not mythology. One small act of kindness had rippled outward in ways Eddie never imagined. His datapad chimed. A message from Rachel. Dinner tomorrow? I want to hear how the ceremony went. Eddie smiled and sent back a confirmation. Rachel had become a good friend through all of this. She'd stood by him when no one believed his story. She'd helped gather evidence and care for Ashtaroth in his final days. She deserved recognition too, though she'd turned down awards just like Eddie had. The next morning, Eddie opened his shop at the usual time. His first customer was a regular, a Vrelian trader who came in every 2 weeks for a trim. They chatted about normal things, business, weather, the new restaurant that had opened on level 12. It was wonderfully ordinary. But as Eddie swept up hair later that morning, a family came to the door. They didn't want haircuts. They just wanted to see the shop. Eddie let them in. The parents looked around respectfully while their 2 children stared at everything with wide eyes. This is where he stayed? One child asked. Right there, Eddie said, pointing to the heating vent. He liked the warm spot. Was he really as big as the statue? The other child asked. Bigger, Eddie said. The statue can't quite capture how magnificent he truly was. The family thanked him and left. Eddie went back to sweeping. This happened sometimes now. People coming by to see the place, to feel connected to the story. Eddie didn't mind. If it helped them remember, it was worth the interruptions. Lunch came and went. Eddie had a few more customers. Then, during a quiet moment in the afternoon, something unexpected happened. A small transport pod arrived at the station. From it emerged a group of dragons. Real dragons, not common aliens. They were rare now, scattered across the galaxy. Most people went their whole lives without seeing one. These 3 dragons were young compared to Ashtaroth, probably only a few hundred years old. They were larger than the tiny form Ashtaroth had taken, but still nowhere near the size of ancient dragon commanders. They came directly to Eddie's shop. "You are Eddie?" the lead dragon asked in careful galactic common. Her scales were deep blue, her eyes sharp and intelligent. "I am," Eddie confirmed, surprised. "We heard what you did," the dragon said. "For Elder Ashtaroth. We wanted to thank you personally. The dragons are few now, scattered. We did not know any of the ancient commanders still lived. That we let one die alone and forgotten." She paused, emotion clear in her voice. "That shames us deeply." "You didn't know," Eddie said. "None of us knew. But you cared enough to find out," the blue dragon replied. "When you could have simply looked away like everyone else. You honored him. You gave him dignity when he had none. For that, all dragons owe you a debt." She reached into a pouch and pulled out something small. A scale, Eddie realized. Dragon scales were valuable, nearly indestructible, and dragons rarely gave them away. "This is from my own body," the dragon said. "A token of gratitude and respect. If you ever need help, any dragon who sees this will know you are a friend to our kind." Eddie accepted the scale carefully. It was warm to the touch and surprisingly light. "Thank you. But I didn't do it for rewards. I did it because it was right." "We know," the dragon said. "That is why you deserve this. You have a good heart, human. The galaxy needs more like you." The dragons left shortly after. Eddie placed the scale carefully in a display case on his wall. Another reminder of everything that had happened. As evening approached, Eddie stood at his shop window watching beings walk past. Hundreds of aliens going about their lives, each one with their own story, their own struggles, their own worth. He wondered how many of them were invisible to others, how many needed someone to see them, really see them, the way he'd seen Ashtaroth. Eddie couldn't help everyone. He was just one person. But maybe that was enough. Maybe one person caring was how change started. One act of kindness that rippled outward until it touched more lives than you could count. Ashtaroth had saved the galaxy thousands of years ago through battles and sacrifice. Eddie had saved one old dragon through simple human decency. Both mattered. Both made a difference. As Eddie closed his shop for the night, he looked one more time at the empty heating vent. "I hope you knew how much you mattered," he said softly. "I hope you rest easy now." The shop was quiet. But Eddie felt, maybe just imagined, a sense of peace in the air. The feeling that somewhere, somehow, an ancient dragon was finally at rest. Eddie turned off the lights and headed home. Tomorrow he would cut more hair. He would talk to more customers. He would live his simple, ordinary life. And he would remember that sometimes the most important thing you can do is see someone who needs to be seen. That was enough.